I'd like to speak, as I explained earlier, that even though the central theme that we're trying to deal with is Shalom Bayis, but Shalom Bayis is part of Yiddishkeit, part of Jewish thought. And therefore, it will broaden out, and there are going to be aspects that are not exclusively Shalom Bayis. But in Shalom Bayis, these things take central stage, so to speak, and become imperative. Whereas in other relations, you're talking about Abba Paltiel, you're supposed to judge. The Mishnah says that you have to done this called Odom Lekaf Schus. This is a directive from the Mishnah that every person should be judged Lekaf Schus. Lekaf Schus basically means that if you have two ways of interpreting what happened, you should take it for granted that the better of the two is what happened. This is Lekaf Schus. Still, in normal circumstances, in terms of in normal relations, if you do not follow this directive, in practical terms, nothing tragic will result. So you were suspecting the person, and you think a little bit negatively about him, and ultimately you can avoid having any particular contact, and life can go on. But in marriage, all of these things are imperative. You cannot ignore. You cannot avoid. A contact. You cannot misinterpret each other, and then life should go on normally. The Mishnah says, coming back to the principle, the Mishnah says, "Havei don es kol ha'odom lekaf schus," that we are instructed to judge everyone lekaf schus, the better of any possibility. It's lekaf schus. Since this is Torah, as the Rebbe always explains, that any directive in Torah is not merely a good practical advice. If it's a directive in Torah, it is based on absolute truth. Because if it is not true, it's not Torah. Torah is called Torah's emes. So this is not just a method of thought to keep you calm and make you feel good and say, oh, most probably he didn't mean it that way, meant it that way. This is the directive in Torah, and therefore it is true. What is the basis of this truth? The basis of this truth, why in fact we have this directive? The basis of this truth in general, in a broader scale, is simply because every Yid has a neshama. And mitzad the neshama, he wants only good. Then there is a step deeper than that. A step deeper than that is that every Yid has an inherent relationship, an inherent connection to another Yid. The union of mitzvahs, Abba Paltiel, again, as Chassidus explains, is a true mitzvah, meaning that Ahavas Yisrael is not artificial, that we make ourselves love every Yid. But this is inherent in the neshama of a Yid, that a Yid loves another Yid. But then, there's much to elaborate on this. I want to come to the union that we are talking about. Here we are talking about a totally different circumstance. We're talking in a home, in a marriage situation. The marriage situation, both people who are in this, both members of this couple, they both want a pleasant and successful marriage. This is a clear truth. And since they both want a pleasant and successful marriage, then clearly, what do they want for the other? They want the best. This is entirely normal. How can they want anything else? How can they expect to have a successful marriage if the other one will have any kind of unhappiness, any kind of discomfort? If this is so obvious and so simple, where then do all the problems that we know exist, where are they coming from? Why? Excuse me? You know something? This is interesting. I want to put this into the tape. Okay? Ephraim is suggesting that perhaps we are misunderstanding what the best is. We want the best for our spouses, but we don't necessarily know what is best. You know something, Ephraim? If it's obvious that you want the best, you may make a mistake, mamash, from day to night. It won't create any problems. Literally, it won't create any problems. If your wife or the husband knows that she or he meant really the best for me, and they have no doubt about it, they see it clearly, but they made a mistake, a grievous mistake, well, there will be no problem. It won't create any schism between, any problem between them. So that is not really hitting the nail on the head. The problem is rooted in the fact that although we are in fact married and we made all that commitment, but since we've had 20 and plus years of living alone, not married, during which time we were used to thinking as individuals, as alone, we continue to think with the same logic. We continue to think as individuals. We do not realize, to recognize, to think that this other person that I'm living with is really my partner in life. Because we have, throughout our past experience, we always thought of the other person as the other person. As someone who either cooperates with me, either is for me or against me. So we continue to think along the same lines. the fact that the other person has wagered her and his life on this partnership escapes us. We simply don't think in those terms. This opens up two areas that we have to reflect on. One is simply to know, and we have to investigate this, that if I think that my spouse is actually not having me in mind and not having my best interest in mind, I have to know that this is a misinterpretation. Clearly that's not the correct thing. But the other thing, the broader aspect that we have to reflect, if in fact we see that we are interpreting, we are seeing a negativity in our spouse, we have to reflect on ourselves. This is always the best answer. We have to reflect on ourselves. This principle we spoke many times about, and as many times as we speak about it, there's always room for reinforcement and there's always room for greater clarification. The principle that I'm referring to is that in marriage, marriage is a unit that is an umbrella unit. Marriage is not an artificial contract between two people who agree to live together. Marriage is when two people enter into a single home, and the single home is what unifies them. And we explained that this single home actually represents the Shekhinah itself, Shekhinah Beinayim. This requires, literally, a complete change, a complete reversal of the way we relate, the way we think about ourselves. Whereas before marriage, as I said before, we think ourselves as an individual. After marriage, we recognize that we are not an individual, and I'm talking about in true Torah terms, but each individual represents this unit. Coming from this perspective, then when we see that the spouse is doing something which to me seems to be not what I would like, there would be two reactions. One would be, maybe the spouse doesn't know what I really want. Maybe I should set her straight and set him straight and explain to him what I really want. And then, maybe in fact, the spouse has not yet learned the significance of our union. And here's where the big responsibility is, and this connects back to our discussion of last week. Maybe the spouse, in fact, has not yet learned the true significance of our union. And that's why the spouse has like a less than perfect and less than positive, a complete positive relation, an attitude. How do I respond to this? And this pertains both to the man and to the woman. This brings me, as I said, to the discussion we had last week, and I want to clarify certain points. I don't know who would remember what was discussed, who would listen, who reviewed it. By the way, the tape, you corrected it? Yeah. I said last week that marriage requires that each one should stand on their own feet. It came back to me, some people asked me and said, but I can be independent. And I want to explain that by no means that I mean that we should be independent, meaning I don't need my husband to help me in anything. I can do everything myself. I don't need my wife to help me in anything. I can do it myself. That's absolutely not what I meant. That's not where I'm going at all, because the husband and wife have to help each other, as we discussed many, many times. What this refers to is the principle that I'm coming to now. Each member of this team, the husband and the wife, want this marriage to be successful and have a stake in it, and have a full understanding what it means, independent of the other. In other words, one does not say, if she wants, then I want. If he wants, then I want. That will not work. Because they both have to contribute, they both have to build this marriage positively, they both have to bring positivity into this marriage. Then it holds. And if one of them is short of something, if one of them is kind of weak, even in this aspect, which is the most important aspect, then the other one helps them to come to see it. This is the principle of independent. I mean, independently positive, independently trying to build this unit. So that even in the worst scenario, which is hardly ever true really, but even in the worst scenario, that not only do I think that my spouse had a negative intent in this action, but even if it were true to some extent, Chas v'sholom, as I said, which is hardly ever possible, even then I can come through and calm my spouse down and say, look, we're a unit, and bring him and her on board. Help the other one to see that which they need to see. And the normal reaction is immediate bickering, and then they become they so to speak touch horns. And of course, we know where that leads. Any dispute, any difficulty, any argument that takes place between the individuals in marriage, if it is inspired, if they have either one of them, or certainly if both, have the sense of what is going on, what their life is about, what this marriage is about, their single intent will be, how do we mend this unit? And how do I show my partner, and how do we both come to recognize where our unit is? Not, Chas v'sholom, the way it happens commonly, where we'll see who wins this argument. In this type of rivalry, we'll see who wins this argument. You can rest assured that both will be losers. There's absolutely no question about it. Both will be losers. Because the misery that comes on one immediately, automatically reflects on the other. Besides that, the marriage itself suffers. So the practical point, the practical aspect of what I want to alert you today is this ever-present misunderstanding, misinterpretation of the deed or intent of our spouses. So one could say, okay, let's go to a counselor and be advised of how to interpret and so forth. You can go to a counselor and they probably may give you practical advice. And as I pointed out throughout the sessions, that no advice, no formal advice can help if we do not have the means with which to receive that advice. If we do not have what Chassidus calls the kelim to receive the advice. And the means, the kelim, with which we receive this kind of advice is the commitment and the principle of the recognition of what the principle of marriage is. There is a klal gadol, as we always say. I discussed it a little bit at length once time in the sessions. The first principle of trying to understand something is to want to understand it. That's a shalos chacham. If you want, you have to want to understand it. If you ask a kasha, a shaila, and what you really intend, what you really want from the shaila is that the kasha should stand, and you should refute the statement, then you'll never be able to understand. That's a rule in any study, in any learning. This translates itself in human relations and translates itself in marriage. Without the clear, conscious recognition that we want this marriage. And again, this has to be a conscious recognition. It's not something, of course I wanted marriage. Look, I've been married 3 years, or 5 years, or 17 years. Makes some difference. I want this marriage means not that I take that for granted, but I want this marriage and I'm conscious. I want this. I want it because that's what my life is committed to. If I want it, then I will be able to find answers and I will be able to receive and accept the answers. This change in life that has to take place at marriage, where one has to step out from being alone and an individual to becoming a member of a team, not just a team, but it's just one of one, a part of a whole. This reflects itself in many other aspects. Besides the principle that they listen to each other and they trust each other and they believe that each one wants the best for the other. But there are other aspects. Some of them we have touched, and I want to elaborate a little bit. The man and the woman in a home have distinct, different responsibilities. Besides having different responsibilities, they have different interests, different natures. And what happens often it's too good now. Huh? The doorbell was fixed. So now it's it rings on its own. Just as pointed out in terms of how one thinks and so forth, there are other activities that also one has to learn and understand what is, where the changes are from being single to married. And in this union, in this area also, I found that there is a very big difference between the way a marriage is set up in a Jewish home as compared to the way marriage runs outside of a kosher Jewish home. I'll give you an example. This is something which I was kind of taken aback one time. But then I found out that this is the way it is. I don't know how things are running in each one of your homes. This is, you know best. But I just want to illustrate a point. I've known a home, a Jewish home, but also, coming from outside, where he was doing his laundry and she was doing her laundry. Now, it really, as a principle, it doesn't matter who is doing, if one does this laundry and one does his laundry or her laundry. As a principle, this is not what is critical. What is critical is that they moved into the same home and they're really living their individual lives. There's no overlap. In Torah, there is an expression, the woman is called Akeres Habayis. The Rebbe used to call her Akeres Habayis. The Rebbe used to refer to the wife, the Balabosta. What does Balabosta mean? Anybody know the word Balabosta mean? Balabosta means the ruler of the house, of the home. Bayis. Bosta comes from the word bayis. Balabosta means Baal as a bayis, one who runs the home, who runs the house. That means Balabosta. As I mentioned many times over, it doesn't mean that one cannot help the other. But there is, just as there is a single voice, a single view in terms of values of the house, there's a single person running the house. Not two people. There's a single person running the house. Everything in this house, this is the house, the home, how it's set up, where everything goes, how everything is run. This is her domain. When they each continue to live in this fashion, as I said, it's not just the work that I'm referring to. It's the concept behind it. The concept is they're really individuals living in the same home. He has to take care of his, she has to take care of hers. If we expand on this, and we can find it in every aspect of their lives. Well, I really don't want to give any more examples because I don't know whose toes I'm going to step over here. I just want to say we have to reflect on this and find where we have these fences that actually define our home as two separate places. Everyone knows of the famous story of the Alter Rebbe, which happened to me last night. Yesterday we spoke about this. There was an instance where the Alter Rebbe was passing by in the hallway from one room to the other. And in that hallway, or she passed by the kitchen was open, the kitchen door was open, and the Alter Rebbetzin was standing there talking to some other women. And she expressed herself in talking to them. She expressed herself. She said, "Meiner sagt." What means "meiner sagt"? Meiner means mine says, meaning my husband. Mine says, but my husband means my husband. Mine means that I own. Meiner, the one who is mine. That means mine. The one who is mine. In other words, this is mine. And the Alter Rebbe heard this, meiner sagt, and the Alter Rebbe said, with one mitzvah I am yours, with how many mitzvahs do I belong to Hashem? And the Alter Rebbe was in his boin, and this whole lineage, this whole story, we went into his spoilers, and then he's saying this, Tzianu Reno, but for bringing, this is not here to discuss. The point which I'm saying is, the Rebbetzin said, meiner sagt. Did the Rebbetzin ever tell the Alter Rebbe what to do? And yet she said, meiner sagt. He is mine. Because in terms of her domain, he is his. He is hers. We have to know that these demarcation lines, these boundaries, this is mine and this is yours, is something that is antithesis, which is mamish the opposite of the concept of Jewish life. And again, as I mentioned many times, it does not mean that they meld, that they kind of melt down, that there is no individuality. With all the individuality, there is that perfect unit, which we discussed many times before. ultimately, we have to know that any foreign influence, any ideas that we bring from outside of Yiddishkeit into our home are eventually going to undermine the beauty of our home and the unity of our home. Any outside influences, non-Torah influences, worldly influences that we bring into our home are eventually going to undermine the beauty of our home and the unity of our home. In a Jewish home, it is perfectly right, perfectly acceptable. Acceptable means, what I mean is from the spouse's perspective. I am doing this for him. I'm doing this for her. And it's not done in terms of any kind of emphasis. I'm doing him a favor, I'm doing her a favor. This is perfectly in line with normal living. Because each one's life is intertwined as one with the other. And if she needs this or he needs this, I don't need any justification for doing it. And I don't need any recognition for doing it. Because recognition itself already says, hey, there's a possibility otherwise. We're two separate people. And what's most troublesome, what really is always outstanding in my mind when I go a little deeper and discuss with people, I see clearly that these are results of outside influences. It's not coming from being developed in a Torah environment. In Torah, this whole inyan that they unite, and they become one, is perfectly natural and no effort on the part of one for the other needs justification and needs any kind of recognition. Let me explain perhaps this in recognition. It is very common and natural. Let us say the woman makes a very good kugel, and she wants that the husband should recognize it was a good kugel. Similarly, the husband wants to have recognition when he does something especially good. That's perfectly natural and it's normal, and it should be there. But we have to understand what that recognition is. If I recognize that this kugel was good, the recognition there consists in the fact you've done it right. You really put into it. You've done it right. I could see the TLC with which it was done. Recognition of this type is normal and perfectly. It doesn't separate between people. It doesn't say, oh, they're separate people. Forget it. It speaks of unity. But there is a subtle difference between that And when one is to recognize in terms of, I did it for you, and you don't recognize what I do for you, that's a different type of recognition. This kind of says that they need kind of recreate this knot, recreate this relationship all the time by doing one thing and doing another thing. That, in effect, hides their true relationship, and it puts it on a superficial keel. In summary, going a little bit in different pieces, in summary, I'm coming back to the principle that we always have to keep in mind and understand, and not only understand and know, but find it really deep down in our own minds that marriage is a principle in human life. Without marriage, I'm not just an individual. My life is a waste. Marriage is a principle in human life. And therefore the commitment to marriage is not a superficial one, not something that I create, but this defines who I am. And therefore, I will see everything in a positive light and try to bring out always the positive light of it. This is the basic message which I had for today. Since it is Shushan Purim, and everybody is still tired from Purim, so I thought we would cut it short a little bit today. Okay. It was a request that I should elaborate a little bit more on this fine difference between saying recognition in terms of the quality of what was done, as opposed to recognition of, I did it for you. And, if any clarification is needed, basically, I would approach it from this point. The truth is, as I mentioned some time before, in order to do something right, in order to put it very simply, to make a good kugel, one needs inspiration to go into the nitty-gritty and to actually, I couldn't do it for nothing, but and to actually measure everything, all the ingredients exactly, and say the line over 10 times and make sure I have it right, and all that. You need something to inspire you. What is this inspiration? And the same thing goes on the husband's side. Whatever, I can't even think of anything the husband can do for the wife. Maybe there is something.